Welcome back to the GCN Racing News Show. Coming up this week, I'll be wrapping up a Tour de France Femmes avec Zwift, which is about as nail-biting as you could possibly get. I'll be analysing how Kasia Niewiadoma won the race and how SD Worx lost it. I'll also look back at the opening two stages of La Vuelta, plus the tours of Denmark and Poland, and the opening stage of the Tour de l'Avenir. Better crack on. This week in the world of racing, we learnt that Captain America, Brandon McNulty, is pretty good at time trialling. He caused a bit of an upset at the Vuelta opener on Saturday, more on that later on. And finally, we learnt that the eternal second, Kasia Niewiadoma, has just won the biggest race on the cycling calendar by just 4 seconds. There's so much to pick apart from yesterday's final stage, let alone the 8-day race as a whole, but I shall do my best. To do that, I'm going to concentrate on the two key players on the GC, Niewiadoma and Demi Vollering. Now, if we cast our minds back to 13 months ago, Vollering was in a league of her own at the race, finishing 3 minutes in front of her own teammate, Kopecky, who was sorely missed this year, with Niewiadoma slipping to third in the final day's ITT. Since then, Niewiadoma, who hadn't won a pro race since 2019, has won the World Gravel Champs and La Flèche Wallonne. But still, nobody expected her to carry this one off, even if we all expected her to be there or thereabouts. Particularly after the Stage 3 individual time trial, in which she conceded over half a minute to a flying Vollering. At that point, I think most of us thought the race was already all but decided. Vollering's advantage over her key GC rivals wasn't huge after that stage, but it was clear that she was at the very top of her game, an ominous sign ahead of the climbs and mountains to come. The pivotal moment came on stage 4, and I could spend about an hour talking about just the last 5Ks of that stage. Now, it's difficult to see exactly how it happened because we only had a long helicopter shot, but there was a big crash on a left-hander with about 5Ks to go. Pfeiffer Georgie went down badly. She fractured her neck and her hand, but fortunately didn't need surgery. It was very obvious, though, that Vollering had also come down. And since the crash was outside the 3K to go mark, she couldn't afford to cruise to the line as she wouldn't be given the same time as the group she was in when she crashed. Now, it took her a while to collect herself and eventually get back on her bike, by which point Kanya and SRAM were already drilling it on the front with Chloe Dygert, Niewiadoma tucked onto her wheel from what was a very small group. So I'll start with that. Was it right for Kanya and SRAM to do that when it's almost certain they knew the yellow jersey had crashed? Tradition says no, but tradition also says you shouldn't be greedy on mountainous stages and you should gift some wins to other riders. Things are changing in cycling, and the argument could be made that staying upright is a big part of the skill set you need to have to win. Did anyone wait for Primož Roglič when he crashed multiple times on the final stage of Paris-Nice a few years back? No. They pressed on, and he lost that race on the final stage due to those crashes. Now, there will be long-time fans watching this who think that this etiquette should be maintained, and I get that, but I also don't mind that Kanya and SRAM pressed on. They had good position, they didn't crash, why not take advantage of that? Now, on to SD Worx, and it's hard to know where to start with them. For what seemed like an age, Vollering was left chasing on her own. The yellow jersey, the big favourite for the GC, with no teammates to help her limit her losses. We could see that Blanka Vash was in the front group. She wasn't working, but she was there. And eventually, we saw Misha Bredeveld waiting for Vollering to give her some help. Vash won the stage, which was a brilliant result for her, and said in her post-race interview that her radio wasn't working, so she didn't hear that her teammate was in trouble. Which I accept, these things do happen with race radios. But it's also pretty obvious in a group of 7 whether your teammate in a bright yellow skin suit is there or not. Now, Vash might well have thought that Vollering would have other teammates helping her. I think I would have thought the same. And she might also have thought that even if Vollering did concede a bit of time, she'd still win overall. Again, I'd probably have thought exactly the same, especially if I was in with the chance of taking the biggest win of my life. Again, not ideal tactics if you're really focused on winning the Tour de France, but I get it. But then half a minute later, we see Lorena Wiebes sprinting for the points still available for 8th place on the stage. I mean, WTF. Firstly, Wiebes was only 3rd in the points classification. Secondly, the win had already gone to her teammate. And thirdly, The race favourite, your teammate, is behind you desperately doing her best to limit her losses. In her post-race interview, Weber said that she looked behind her and she thought she saw something yellow on the floor, but then thought that Vollering would be alright and would win overall anyway. Would Webers have been the difference between Vollering winning and losing the Tour de France? Quite possibly, given that it came down to just 4 seconds. The rest of the SD Worx team that day were all either caught up in or behind the crash, or already dropped, so unable to help. It's hard to know what was going on there exactly. I mean, it's no secret that Vollering is moving on from SD Worx at the end of this season, so the pessimistic fan might assume that that is a reason for what seemed like disharmony within the team. Then again, it's never really been a team that's been tactically supreme. They've just normally got the strongest riders at each race. Anyway, it meant that Vollering slipped from 1st to 9th with 1 minute and 19 seconds to make up on Niewiadoma, the new leader of the race. And that's pretty much how things remained until yesterday, bar a 4-second bonus that Vollering picked up by finishing 3rd on the penultimate stage. So, 1 minute 15 seconds the gap between the two, going into what is the toughest stage I've ever seen the women's peloton tackle. 160 kilometres with 3,600 metres of climbing, including the Col de Glandon and Alpe d'Huez. SD Worx tried to get riders into the day's breakaway, clearly looking to set something up for an attack from Vollering, possibly on the Glandon. And that's exactly what happened. Niamh Fisher-Black went to the front and set a pace so hard that some of the riders in the top 10 of GC were already dropped. And then with around 2.5 Ks to the top, Vollering went. And I've got to say, soon after she went, I thought the race was over. The gap back to the group of Niewiadoma was already a minute as she went over the top of the Glandon, and we're still over 50 Ks to go. But that's where things got really interesting. So Vollering had company at the front of the race in the form of Paulina Royackers of Phoenix de Koenig, herself actually ahead of Vollering on GC by 2 seconds. But Vollering seemed to be getting so frustrated at points, I think that Royackers probably slowed her down as much as anything. In contrast, Niewiadoma had a fair bit of help in her group, not least from Lucinda Brand of Little Trek, riding out of her skin at the service of Gaia Riolini. So, by the foot of Alpe d'Huez, the gap between the two of them was 43 seconds. But then just 3 Ks up it, that gap had gone up to 1 minute and 7. And if Vollering took the 10 bonus seconds to the stage win, that would have been enough to win the overall. Again, the way the race was unfolding, it almost looked like a foregone conclusion. Only it wasn't. Niewiadoma dug deeper than she ever has before, keeping the gap around a minute for what seemed like an eternity, and then eventually reversing the trend, lowering it to 46 seconds with 3 Ks to go. Now, she was still getting some help from Music and Riolini, whilst Vollering was having to do the bulk of the work on her own, in the knowledge that the rider glued to her wheel could still beat her in the general classification. It was just, well, it was edge of your seat stuff right to the finish line. Vollering easily outsprinted Royackers to take the stage win and the 10 bonus seconds, and then it was a case of watching the clock as Niewiadoma made her way to the line. To make things even more complicated for Niewiadoma, Music got round her to take the 4 bonus seconds for 3rd on the stage, but Niewiadoma had done it by just 4 seconds. It is a stage that I will always remember. It had everything you wanted from a bike race and more. Well, except live coverage from Kilometre Zero, but that's a different subject. The emotion of both Niewiadoma and Vollering told their own stories at the finish. Lots of tears, some of elation, some of bitter disappointment. So well done to Kasia Niewiadoma, the woman who'd forged a reputation for always being the bridesmaid. She's now won the biggest race in the world. Right, a rundown of the general classification. The performance of her life left Royackers in 3rd place on GC, whilst Music and Riolini finished 4th and 5th. In 6th overall was Cédrine Cobal, who told her own story with victory on stage 6. That was impressive. She's a demon descender, isn't she? The sort of rider you have to watch from between your fingertips. She became the first ever French stage winner at the race, incidentally, and after that it was Gigante and Brand on GC, and then Labou and de Jong, who both slipped 5 places on the final day. Slipping 9 places on the final day was Puk Pieterse, but she still went home with the best young riders jersey and an amazing stage win in which she got the better of Vollering. Given that that was Pieterse's first ever pro stage race, I think she can go home quite happy with herself. I'd also felt just right that Marianne Vos took home the green jersey, a full 60 points clear of Vibes in second. She didn't quite manage to take a stage win along the way, but rode brilliantly throughout the week. And it also felt right that Justine Gekir of AG Insurance took the mountains jersey. She herself had a brilliant win on the penultimate stage of the race, taking that QOM jersey in the process and defending that on the final day. And finally, Lidl Trek took a fairly comfortable win in the team's classification. Oh, and I should also give a mention to Charlotte Kuhl. She didn't finish the race, but it was still a massive success. She won the first 2 stages in bunch sprints, getting the better of Lorena Vibes on the second of those. Just before I move on, a reminder that we have a huge new collection of French and Spanish related t-shirts now for sale over on our shop, where you'll also find these, if I can find it, brand new GCN Camelback water bottles. This t-shirt, incidentally, is one of the many t-shirt designs that you'll find over at shop.globalcyclingnetwork.com. Many thanks to all of you who've already made a purchase. On to La Vuelta then, where we've had the opening 2 stages of the race. There was a bit of an upset in the opening ITT. Pre-race favourite Josh Tarling could only manage 6th. Probably a bit unfair actually to say only, given that he's only 20 and riding his first ever Grand Tour. But in his post-race interview, he said he'd struggled a bit mentally since the Olympic Games, in which a puncture prevented him from medaling. So that's understandable. Eduardo Affini set the early marker. And with Tarling unable to beat him, he must have been thinking the win was on the cards. However, 4 riders would eventually go quicker than the Italian, and the fastest of all of them was UAE's Brandon McNulty. He finished 2 seconds in front of another surprise performance from Matthias Vacek, with Wout van Aert in 3rd, Stefan Kung 4th. At that point, it meant that UAE Team Emirates had worn 40 of the 42 leaders' jerseys awarded at the Men's Grand Tour so far this year. Primoz Roglic was the best of the GC riders on the day in 8th, with Almeida 3 seconds behind him in 10th. Tiberi and Vlasov also finished in the top 20, whilst Yates, Arensman, Gegenhardt, Mas, Carapaz and Martinez also put in respectable performances. The biggest losers on the GC on that opening day were defending champion Sepp Kuss. He lost 45 seconds to Roglic. Carlos Rodriguez, who lost 38 seconds to him, and Mikel Landa, who lost almost a minute to Roglic. The lead of the race did change on the opening road stage, which finished in a bunch sprint, with a bunch that didn't contain that many sprinters. A full 1k lead out from Affini left Wout van Aert on the front and almost forced to kick first, but within a few pedal strokes, Caden Groves of Alpecin had got alongside and then passed him to take his 5th Vuelta stage win. In finishing 2nd though, and taking some bonuses en route as well, Van Aert had done enough to get himself into the leader's red jersey. The first time Visma have led a Grand Tour since Kuss won this race last year. There's another sprint on the cards today, and then tomorrow they are already onto the first summit finish of the race. I've got quite a lot of other racing to wrap up now, and I'll start with the Tour of Denmark, where the final GC came down to a single second. A win for DSM Firmenich Post-NL put Tobias Lund Andersen into the race lead after the opening team time trial, while Stage 2 came down to an incredible battle between Arnaud Delis and Magnus Cort on the uphill sprint to the line. The Belgian kicked from what seemed like about a kilometre to go, and it looked like he'd got Cort beaten, but he'd gone too soon. Cort managed to come around him just before the line. That effort, though, must have taken so much out of both of them. It looked brutal. Delis got the better of Cort on Stage 3, albeit behind Lund Andersen, but the difference in bonus seconds put Delis 5 seconds in front of Cort on GC. 23-year-old Jelte Krensen took his first ever pro victory a day later, but the general classification battle came down to the 5th and final stage into Gladsaxe. Delis found himself completely out of position coming into the line, but thankfully for him, Cort could only manage 3rd, leaving him a second behind Delis on GC. The win on that stage went to Lund Andersen again, in what was the 5th victory this year for the 21-year-old. At the Tour de Pologne, the battle of the sprinters was won by Olaf Koy. He won 2 of the 3 sprint stages there, with Tim Merlier taking the other one. That was the 13th win of the year, though, for Tim Merlier, putting him second behind Pogačar this season. 3rd this season, on win rate at least, are 2 riders who had plenty of their own success in Poland. Thibaut Nace of Lidl Trek took his tally for the year up to 9, with 3 brilliant stage wins over the 8 days. That guy is going from strength to strength, isn't he? But the other rider to take the 9th win of their season was Jonas Vingegaard. Didn't take any stage wins, but his consistency over the week paid off with a win on GC. He finished 13 seconds in front of Diego Ulissi and 20 ahead of his own teammate Wilco Kelderman. Romain Gregoire took his first ever top 5 placing on GC in a World Tour level stage race with 4th. At the Tour de l'Avenir, there was a bit of an upset on the opening 7.1k ITT. Ineos Grenadiers' Michael Leonard, riding there for Canada, put 7 seconds into Joe Blackmore of Great Britain, with pre-stage favourite Jakob Söderqvist having to settle for 3rd. Pre-race favourite Jarno Vida finished in 9th. You may remember that the Belgians already won the Giro Next Gen, Alpe Isère Tour and the Giro Ciclista de la Val d'Aoste at Mont Blanc this season, and he's only 18. If he wins the Tour de l'Avenir this week, it would almost certainly be the best under-23 season we've ever witnessed. You can watch live coverage of the Tour de l'Avenir throughout this week on Discovery Plus and Max, where you'll be able to watch a full season of bike racing live and on demand. A bit of transfer news to wrap things up now, and first up, the rumour that Alberto Bettiol was set to join Astana mid-season has been confirmed. The Italian champion has signed a 3-year deal with them and has left EF Education EasyPost with immediate effect. Sticking with Astana, they've signed Wout Poels from Bahrain, but Alexei Lutsenko will leave them at the end of this year after spending his entire 11-year career with them so far. He will join Israel Premier Tech on a 2-year deal. Max Schachmann is heading back to Soudal Quickstep, with whom he already rode for in 2017 and 2018. Emmanuel Buchmann is another rider leaving Red Bull Bora Hansgrohe. Not a big surprise really, given their falling out due to non-selection at the Giro. He's making his way to Cofidis, and yet another exit from Red Bull Bora Hansgrohe is Leonard Kemna. He's going to Lidl Trek. Mark Hirschi has been confirmed as heading to Tudor Pro Cycling, where he'll join forces with the man he beat in San Sebastian. Julian Alaphilippe was also recently confirmed as joining that squad. Johan Jacobs moved from Movistar to Groupama, whilst Ineos Grenadiers have signed yet another talented youngster from the US. Artem Schmidt will make the move there after 2 years with the Hagens Berman Jayco team. And just finally, Rod Ellingworth is set to rejoin Bahrain Victorious as part of their senior management, although his exact role remains unclear. Ellingworth resigned from Ineos Grenadiers at the end of last season and has been in a role as race director at the Tours of Britain this year. Right, I will leave it there for this week. Thanks for watching everyone. I'll be back this time next week to wrap up the first week of La Vuelta. See you then.